Okay, it's 12:30. I'd like to call this meeting of Corporate Services Committee to order. Thank you, colleagues, for being here. And I recognize Councillor Usher and Councillor Ridley, who are joining us as guests. Deputy Mayor Hubert, unfortunately, sends his regrets he won't be able to be here today. I'll just look at disclosures of interest to see if there are any. Not seeing any from any of our guests or members. Okay. Move on to consent items. We have 4 of them before us. I wonder if anyone would like to pull any of those items. Councillor Usher.
With your indulgence, Mr. Chair, I'd like to address each of them. So can we take them one at a time?
Sure. Let's move on to item number 2. Item number 2 is the staff report on the municipal election update. It's to be received. Let's look to committee to see if there are any questions. Councillor Morgan and then Councillor Usher.
Thank you. I have a couple comments and then a couple questions. First off, I want to thank our staff for the report. I think it's really great to have not only an overview of the preparations that are being made, but as well as the differences between expenses occurred in the 2014 and 2018 election. I know that with the discussion around ranked ballots, there were a couple of concerns raised through the public feedback. One of them was potential longer waits at the polling stations. So I'm glad to see that there are about 55% more tabulators that are going to be in play at voting stations, and hopefully that will help alleviate that to a certain degree. As well, the other concern, which is the one I have the question about, was related to making sure people are very familiar with the ballot and the process before the election comes around. And I see that there are expenses on here related to mock election services. I wonder if the clerk or a relevant person can comment on what activities would be related around any sort of mock election.
Through Mr. Chair, the mock election that's referenced is actually a staff-led mock election where we're actually testing the equipment. So that's not necessarily a public engagement mock election. It's an actual testing of the equipment, and we're doing that in March. But we do have a number of community events that we're attending throughout the year to raise the profile of ranked ballots for the elector.
Would there be an opportunity to allow the public to engage beyond just the sessions you have in some sort of mock election on a wider scale than is contemplated, perhaps at libraries with the actual equipment? I'm just wondering if that's an opportunity that would give you not only a chance to engage with, or the public to engage with the ballots, but also a chance for your office to have a real-time, data set to use in your testing.
So we started our first mock election at our candidate information session in this past February. At that session, we actually had the candidates mark a ballot very similar to what would be used on October 22nd. We'll be rolling that out into the libraries starting April, May, and through June. We're across, it'll be in Access Magazine, we're across the city, and we're going to be doing various demonstrations very similar to that, where people have a chance to look at a ballot, mark a ballot, and then we'll do a counting demonstration following that.
Okay, so when I asked about mock elections, that's kind of what I was talking about. I didn't mean like we're going to have, displays at Tim Hortons and that sort of thing. I meant, will there be an opportunity to test, engage, and then count the actual ballots in a meaningful way? It sounds like that's exactly what you're contemplating. So I think that's a great thing, because not only will it give people a chance to be familiar with what is probably going to be a simpler ballot than we had back when we had border control and 2 councillors and a mayor, and which I remember being a very convoluted ballot. As well as give you the opportunity to test the equipment in a very meaningful way, which I'm sure will all work out very, very well. I think that you're doing great work on that, but knowing that everything is fine is also an important step in the process. So thanks. That's all the questions I had for now.
Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, my comments will be for both 2 and 3. There's a lot of changes to this act, and some of them I must have missed particularly the fact that when we apply for a nomination, that we have to have 25 signatures. I missed that completely. I didn't realize we had to do that. The amount of money that we could spend and so on. And I wonder what measures we are taking to advise the public or the people who may want to run of these big changes, because I know people who want to run, who are going to put their names in, but they have no idea that they have to have these 25 names. They think that it's just like it was in the past. And they have no idea about the expenditure. They have no idea about the donation that people could make, which all these things are changed. And you don't hear about those in the public, and yet they're written here. And I just wonder what steps we're going to take before the beginning of May to ensure that the public or the people who are doing this at campaign school and other places like that, if we're making sure that these people are aware of this. Like I said, I hear people saying that they're going to run, but they think that on the 1st of May, they're just going to come and sign the papers as we generally do. It's not going to be that way anymore. So can I get an answer for that, please?
Through Mr. Chair, as Ms. Corman just alluded to, we did have a candidate information session on February 10th where 30 people attended, and we have another one coming up on April the 7th, which we have approximately 40 people registered for right now. We've done this report in order to, even though we weren't required by legislation to report out, we did this very deliberately so that it was out in the public what those changes are and that they were summarized on a table. We are also in the elections office and on my own as well, when we get inquiries, are bringing these matters to the public's attention. We do have a candidate information package that will be available shortly before the election, the nominations open, which will outline some of these changes that occurred to the Elections Act. We'll also be reaching out to the media shortly, talking about these changes. So we're trying to get out into the community, not only to talk about ranked ballots, but also the changes to the elections so that anyone that may be thinking about running knows about the changes.
And I certainly appreciate that. And I don't want the staff to think that I'm criticizing them. I think I appreciate reading this because this is where I'm beginning to realize where we stand with this. But I know people have approached me on last week and then on Saturday and then on Sunday about running, and they're not aware of this. So with all due respect to the staff, it's one thing for us to publish things like this, but we got to find another way that we could actually get it in there. The campaign schools are good, but we only have 2 of them, you know, and I'm not even sure that, I know one of these people been to one of the campaign schools, but some of the others haven't been to any campaign school. I'm calling it campaign school. They may call it something else. I'm just concerned that on the last minute, the information may still not get to the appropriate people or the number of people. That's all I'm saying. I do respect what the staff is saying and the effort that they're making, but we always find that we still shortfall. And I'm not saying them, I'm saying we in total. So I bring it up now so that whatever we can think of to get the word out there, we can do it. All of us, including us as members of this committee and members of council, as well as the staff, because we've all got associated friends or acquaintances out there who may want to run, and we should not discourage them. We should encourage them. Thank you.
Any other questions about number 2? Okay. We have that moved and seconded. Opening the vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
I know that Councillor Usher had pulled number 3 and then he spoke to number 3. Anyone else on number 3? Councillor Morgan.
Yes, just a comment. This is the one on municipal election compliance audit committees. I actually had the privilege of sitting on a municipal election compliance audit committee for the town of Milton. They actually opted to have someone from outside their community be on one of their audit committees to give a perspective that may not have any sort of ties or relationships or, you know, knowledge of the candidates so they could execute it in a very fair way. That being said, as someone who is an elected official, I prefer to be relatively hands-off with the selection of the members of our Municipal Election Compliance Audit Committee. And so I think passing the clerk's recommendations as they stand in this report is probably the appropriate thing to do. And it seems like they've tracked down not only good repeat members of the committee, but new individuals as well.
Any other discussion on that? Okay, let's have a mover and a seconder for that. Opening the vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, that brings us to item number 4, the update on the equity inclusion lens for development of policies, procedures, and programs. I know that was pulled by Councillor Usher, and I understand Councillor Ridley is here to speak to that. I'll look to other members of the committee. Go ahead, Councillor Usher.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate the report, and I'm glad to see that we are not just going by one municipality. There are many municipalities out there who are involved with this type of thing, and I would like to ensure that we have the latest. Things have changed over the years. People look at these situations with different lens or different ways, and they go by experience, and we get different experiences happening to us on a daily basis. And I don't know about you, but I get a lot of comments from the community, and I mentioned some of those when we talked about the workforce census and community comparison at council, because I made a statement when that report came to committee, and then I got some feedback from people over the week, and I mentioned some of those. I was a little reluctant to say some of the things that they say because I don't think it's necessary for me to say that. I think that when I speak about this, I think that people realize that there's some concern out in the community. So when we do this report and come back with this inclusion lens and development of whatever we are going to do, I'm hoping that we take into consideration, in addition to any other reports, that we make it for London. And I say this because it's not every city that experiences the same thing. And if you take, for example, the population of visible minorities, and the way we, the City of London, happen to employ visible minorities. It's not everywhere that experiences that. Ottawa does a much, much better job than we do. And part of it is because of their environment. The federal government also has a principle of doing that, and they pretty well follow that. I'm not here to criticize, I'm here to lend a voice, okay? So I think that when we create this report, we need to look at the workforce census and community comparators also, to ensure that we fix what that report said to us. And what I'm talking about here, to be bold about it, is that when that report came forward, it came forward and said that based on a internal census that we did, we found, that was based on 60% response, we found that 14% of our workforce was visible minority. And I'm looking for something better than that. The public is looking for something better than that in the future. We're looking for something closer to 20%. But not only are we looking for something closer to 20%, we're looking for that right across the board. Because even this weekend, what I hear was that that's fine for you to say that you have that. But when you look at it, it's all, I'll use the word blue-collar workers to separate it the way it was told to me. And I think we have to do better than that. We have to look at our workforce. I'm not saying that we must neglect hiring anybody at all. I'm saying that me and the public is out there is saying that we must do better with ensuring that our workforce more fit the demographics of the community in every respect, whether it's diversity or whatever lens we want to look at. And I'm hoping that when this report comes back to us, when we look at these different lenses that we're talking about, which is lens from other similar organizations and consult with the various City of London Advisory Committee. I'm not very satisfied with we just consult with the advisory committees. I think there's a much, much broader scope of experts out there, people with a different vision than just our advisory committee that we should be able to consult with and get some reasonable response and understanding and appreciation for where we are. Because we could sit around here and accept numbers all we want. The people who are experiencing it out there are the people who are feeling it. And somebody came to me last week and they said they will never, no, sorry, they didn't say that. They don't apply for jobs with the City of London anymore because they know that they're not going to get employed. And 2 people came straight to my office and told me that. And one person said they were the best in their field. And when they applied for a job, they were turned down because they were black and they got curly hair. So I think that that's the type of statement that we need to remove from people's mind. We need for the people who are doing the interviews and the people who are writing these reports to be able to look at somebody and don't see that color and don't see that hair texture, because that's poor results. And I'm saying to you, and to anybody who wants to listen, that that's what the perception is out there that we from the Corporation of the City of London is portraying. And I'm going to be speaking tonight at the TD Bank on Black History Month. And, you know, they do a pretty good job, but they are in the same boat that we do. I'm not going to be talking this way to them. I'm going to be talking about something else. I'm just going to give them a little bit of history of the City of London and the Black history of the City of London. But I like to be positive with these things. I don't like to be negative with it. But sometimes I have to be outright and bold, because right in here, 8 months ago, I was told that we're going to be bold from now on. I haven't seen the boldness yet. Thank you.
Councillor Ridley.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Usher, for your remarks. I think, you know, what you say and the perception in the community, I think many of us have heard that as well. And I know that through these policies and development of these tools, I'm hopeful that we will see improvement and change. And that was part of my support and push forward on some of these items. I came today specifically to speak to this item because I have a couple of concerns, and I had articulated the concerns at the previous meeting, I believe last November as well. And it's about the equity and inclusion lens being built upon the gender lens tool. And so I feel pretty passionately that these need to be separate and distinct tools and lenses. And so I've sent some wording to the clerk for the committee that I hope she can distribute to those on the committee, and perhaps somebody would move. But basically it's in part A, removing after be developed, building on a gender equity lens, which is already in place. So just continuing on with the rest. And then adding a part C, because I recognize that the lenses need to have consistent language and have some consistency to be applied. So I think if we keep the gender lens separate, we could still review it to make sure it's consistent with the new lens that we're developing. I think that they need to be distinct and separate. And I think that, and not in the motion I sent the clerk, but I think that we need to be in every report that we're doing. This is about setting our policies. We need to see from staff side a check and balance in place to say how was the tools or how were the tools utilized. So I would like to see, you know, a whole new section on our reports once we do this that are saying, you know, we used the gender equity lens in the following ways, or these sections were reviewed using that, and here's how we used the equity and inclusion lens. So I prepared some wording, and I think I may have a mover for that wording, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions about why I think it should be separate and distinct. But I do think that both are valid and important, and I would just hate to see, having it under the one umbrella, us focusing too much on one way or the other. I think having the two tools in place that are working in combination are actually going to move us forward faster and better.
I haven't seen the language, but is there a mover for this? Okay, so perhaps the clerk can get that up on the screen. We'll see if there's a seconder, and then we'll have a discussion. So I'm just going to look to the counselor. Is that the language you're looking for? And the mover, Counselor Morgan, and the seconder, Mayor Brown, you're comfortable with that? Let's just get it moved and seconded, and then we'll get into discussion. Okay, great. Discussion on that? Mayor Brown.
Just a question, looking for some comments from Mr. Coxhead or his staff. I think that the councillor was very, very clear in the rationale for moving in this direction, and I'm looking for some feedback from you on how that might change your work plan.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll defer to Salia, who's done the review of the various lenses from other municipalities and why we would recommend the building on the gender lens as them not being mutually exclusive. And I'll allow Salia to provide that to you, and then we can carry on from there.
Good afternoon. I think I'm sorry, forgive me for saying this, but when I'm looking at your suggestion for C, which says the gender equity lens be reviewed, I believe when we had first suggested that the new equity and inclusion lens be developed with respect to using the same language and the same style as the gender equity lens has used, it was because the training has already been conducted on gender equity lens, and there's been a lot of positive feedback, and there's clear understanding around it. So even in terms of the development of equity and inclusion lens, it was to continue the same use of language and the same and a similar format, just so to bring and maintain that consistency of messaging. So yes, the gender equity lens is distinct and separate, but that's the one that's being actually used to kind of model our system as we move forward. We're definitely looking at what City of Ottawa has looked at in terms of their format. At first view and at more in-depth view, it's the City of Ottawa Equity and Inclusion Lens is a beautiful marketing tool. If anything, I think we should probably use it as to talk about all the good stuff that City of London continues to do. I think it can be used for that purpose as well. Forgive me, but I'm slightly confused because I'm thinking that we are already doing what you're asking in terms of maintaining the authenticity and credibility of the gender equity lens, and then looking at the equity and inclusion lens as being a separate and unique thing, but which also incorporates the language and the process. So I hope I'm able to explain that.
Okay, everybody's putting their hands up. So I'm going to go to Mr. Coxhead briefly, and then the mayor wants to speak, so go ahead.
Thanks. So, and I appreciate the clarity. I think if the scenario is that we're going to keep our gender lens, and we're going to develop the equity inclusion lens based on the gender lens for that language. So they will both be distinct and separate and used parallel, if that's a fair summary of what we just heard.
I just see Councillor Ridley nodding. I wonder if, do you want to nod more clearly?
Thank you. We're perhaps all talking the same thing and using different language. However, when I read Part A, it wasn't clear to me that we were doing two complete, distinct, separate lenses. What I read was we were building on that lens, and it wasn't clear enough. So I think that the motion is still good in terms of it's just making it clear that it's a separate one. And the only reason I asked for any review of the gender lens was in case you wanted to make minor tweaks to make it consistent with the other. It's not about reviewing the entire lens or tool that we've already trained and are doing good work on. It's a matter of if there needs to be tweaks, you now have the ability to bring those back to say, we need to change it into this format to be consistent with the other tool.
Mayor Brown.
Thanks very much, Chair. It's been said a couple of times already, so I'm just going to say this quickly. I appreciate the councillor bringing this forward. Certainly when we think back to the time that we worked on our strategic plan in 2014, early 2015, we wanted to be really clear that the gender equity lens focused on 50% of our population and that it should be separate and distinct. This new lens is as important as the gender equity lens, but is separate and distinct, and as others have said in the past. So I appreciate what the councillor has done with this recommended wording, because that makes this crystal clear. And C could very well be redundant. And based on some of the comments I've heard from staff, I believe that maybe it is, but this was my interpretation of the motion, a respectful way for Councillor Ridley to bring forward a change, but to respect the overall outcomes that we're all focused on, so that we do ensure consistency between the two. And so that's why I'm happy to second it. I think that this is, this articulates a truer direction to the work that we did in our strategic plan and the direction that came forward this past November.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, and thank you for the debate and discussion so far. I would agree that Councillor Ridley's changes are basically suggesting clarity on the gender equity lens being a separate and distinct piece. It certainly doesn't preclude the same language that was used in the gender equity lens to be applied to the equity and inclusion lens. I think she's just looking to ensure that they are, separate, distinct policies, not, all grouped together in one big policy. On C, I don't read C at all as reviewing the validity or the value or anything like that of the gender equity lens. It is something that we've passed and supported as a council. It is something that we've developed training on. I think given that you've done training, given that it's been out there and being used, given that we're looking at this, I think all Councillor Ridley's C does is suggest that if there are any changes, that they could come back and we could make any sort of updates, and it would apply to even feedback during the training sessions. So that's why it says be directed to review and report back with any recommended changes. In some cases, there may be no recommended changes. It just leaves the door open for that particular review and the council authorization of that should it be necessary. But I certainly don't read it as anything more than giving you an additional opportunity to come back and make some tweaks to that if you deem it necessary.
Okay, I don't see any other discussion. The motion's been moved and seconded. We'll open the vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you very much, committee. Brings us to item number 5. This is pulled by Councillor Usher. I'll just look to see if there's any other speakers. This is Infrastructure Canada's Smart Cities Challenge.
Well, I guess, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I was just looking for staff to just tell us a little bit more. This is a big thing, and it just says to receive the information. And I just want to know if we, as the Corporation of the City of London, is going to take any special interest in this Smart Cities Challenge. It seems to me that this is not just necessary for municipalities, but for other organizations. And I just wonder if somebody who is more familiar with it could address it. I don't know, or some other time. If it's not to the committee, then to me alone. If the committee doesn't want it, that's just my request.
Sure, I see Ms. Wilcox is here, and I see Titus Ferguson in the back, speaking of people who don't work for the city, who are here to speak to this item. So, Ms. Wilcox.
Thank you, through the chair. So the councillor is correct. I can't see him, but the Smart Cities Challenge is a competition that's open to all communities, and it was launched by Infrastructure Canada. It's intended to inspire communities across the country to define their future and to help residents by using a smart cities approach. So smart cities is not a new concept here. There's been a great deal of work underway related to smart cities at the City of London. It was called out specifically within the London Plan. There's a chapter that speaks to that. It's noted within the strategic plan. And there is a strategy under development, which is now called Future City Strategy, but that is our smart cities strategy for the City of London. And it's noted in the report that an update's expected to come back in April on that. So specific to the challenge, so it's open to any community. There are several prize categories that are noted, one being open to all communities for $50 million. There are two prizes of $10 million, and that's for communities under 500,000. And then there's another one for communities under 30,000, I believe. So what it really asks for, and at the heart of the challenge, is that you work with your community to define a challenge statement. And that's really defining a problem or a key issue that the community is facing, and working with the community to develop and shape what a problem statement would be, and really how would you go about solving that issue, and what are the outcomes or that you are looking to achieve by addressing that problem. So we are certainly interested, and we'll be undertaking several actions related to the Smart City strategy. So within the report, we outline an engagement and communication strategy. So the first piece, and this would be launched following council approval of this report, so next Wednesday on February 28th. So we begin by doing some broad engagement around Infrastructure Canada defines some buckets, for lack of a better word, around economic opportunity, empowerment and inclusion, et cetera. So we'd be seeking engagement on where people would like to see us submit an application around. What would a community application look like? So we're asking people to weigh in on where they'd like to see that work happen. Following that, we move into a specific ideation session in late March. We haven't nailed down a date yet, but hope to have that soon. And that would be to work through, based on the feedback from phase one, narrowing down what a challenge statement would look like related to that area of focus. And then following that, we would develop an application and submit it, meeting the deadline of April the 24th of this year.
Well, I certainly appreciate that synopsis, and I didn't mean to put Steph on a spot with this. This is a big thing. I just want to be sure that if there is an opportunity for us to get something out of this, that we do. I go to a lot of these conferences, and they're always winners for something. It's time that I see London as a winner of something. So that's where I'm coming from. I'd like to see us get some of this money. So I really thank staff for this. The next thing is that I think we should try to engage the public somehow, because there are lots of ideas out there outside of what we could think of in this building or in our footprint, you know. So thanks very much, and I look forward to hearing more about this, and any part that I could play, I certainly want to be a part of it. Thank you.
Councillor Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I have read a lot about the Smart Cities Challenge and had an opportunity to meet with Ms. Wilcox to chat about this. And I believe what she's crafted out in this report with her team is a very appropriate approach to the public engagement and moving towards submitting an application to the contest. I think it's appropriate given the tight timelines. The applications are to be submitted by April 24th. That's not a lot of time. That means we have 60 some odd days to pull together the community engagement, develop the idea, and submit the application. And why it's really important to do the community engagement is because if you read the terms on how the Smart Cities Challenge will work and how it will be judged and who's going to win it, it's going to be those who found something that is supported by the community and will actually impact that community in a meaningful way. It needs to be something that's transferable to other communities. So there are very good opportunities to do the engagement in the way that it was outlined, to determine what that is, and then build out the application with a very specific initiative from there. In fact, I'm comfortable enough with the process that I'd be happy to move any sort of necessary endorsement or council endorsement of this process so that her and her team could move forward in a way that isn't going to be tied up with coming back to committee and council multiple times. Obviously, it would be a great advantage to the city to win $10 million for any bid that we could submit based on public engagement, and I'd be very comfortable giving that delegated discretion to the team in the process to be able to do so. Now, if there's a point that you can come back and update us, that would be great, but I certainly don't want council and a council cycle to be what holds back an application going in on time on April 24th. So I'd like to hear from Ms. Wilcox on what support we could give as a committee that would allow her to do this work, and then I'd be happy to move the appropriate support as a part B to this, which is just receive the report, but I certainly think an endorsement and support of a direction would be appropriate as well.
Thank you. Through the chair. I think, as the councillor outlined, there are very, very tight timelines with this and meeting the committee cycle. Our intention was to bring this forward, and we would be engaging council all along the way. We outlined that in the communication strategy as well, that we would give you a package that outlines kind of a social media strategy, the key social media assets, what that comms plan looks like. So I think, and our intention would be, following the development of this, that we could come back and report on what that application looked like. But as suggested, if we can involve council through those means as we work through the process and not coming back, I think that would be very helpful.
Yes, so given that, it may be appropriate for the committee, and again, I'd be happy to move this if there was a seconder, to add some language that would endorse the process that staff has outlined, knowing that staff will be checking back in with council at every opportunity on this, but that there are limited opportunities to do so, so that they have our permission to go ahead with the plan that they have structured to make a bid on time. I don't have language for that because I'm basically doing this at committee based on the feedback, but I'm hoping that the clerk can come up with something like that, and I'd be happy to hear from my committee colleagues on if there's support to move in that direction.
Well, you've talked long enough that other people now want to be on the speakers list, so perhaps Councillor Zafman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, I'd be happy to support additional B in terms of endorsing this going forward from a council perspective. I think it's a great initiative, and one of the things which I love to see is I worked on a Smart Cities Challenge when I was working at the City of Stratford. It was an international challenge, a little bit different, but one of the components which I think was really crucial in that was the working together of multiple departments and staff working together, which I already see here in this report, with recognition and appreciation extended to people from multiple departments that we have at City Hall. And I think that's really fantastic, because I think the way that we're going to be able to publicize this the best and hopefully come to something that we can win with, you know, as the city, I think the best way to do that is by working together. So it's great to see.
Okay, any other speakers while we're waiting for the language to pop up? Let's just check with Ms. Wilcox, is that fine? Okay. No further discussion, let's open the vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
That brings us to item number 6, the apportionment of taxes. Not to be heard before 1 o'clock, so let's deal with that right now. The recommendation is up before us, committee. If there's a mover and a seconder, we'll get that up and then see if there are any questions for Mr. Edmonds. Okay, that's been moved and seconded. I'll just look to see if there's any members of the public who would like to speak to the apportionment of taxes item on the agenda. No? Okay.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, that brings us to item number 7, which is a submission from Councillor Usher. And there's also, as you see on the added, a request for delegation status from John Eberhardt from the Rotary Club. I'll just look to Councillor Usher. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, with your indulgence, one of the things that we are going to be, in addition to what I am talking about here, there is a gentleman who wants to make a presentation. I just want to, okay, so the gentleman is here. So how do you want to handle this, Mr. Chair? Because I'd like to address it, and I'd like to hear if we're going to allow this gentleman to make a submission. Would you like to deal with that portion first, whether we're going to allow that person to be a part of it before I make my address?
Well, I'll look to committee to see how you'd like to handle it. I'm fine with hearing from you first about the general topic, and then dealing with the delegation status, hearing from the delegation, and then getting into discussion about the issue more substantively, if that's agreeable. I see a lot of nodding. So why don't you lead off, and then we'll deal with the delegation requests.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I don't take this lightly, and I know that some people may not quite appreciate it, and I don't mean the people here, but some of the people from the public. But this is something that we did in the past. This is not something new to cities. And when I said this, I'm talking about sister city arrangement. We've had a sister city arrangement for many, many years, even before I came on council. And some of you experienced a visit from that city last year, from Dangmin, or however you pronounce it in China, Nanjing. And I believe that we had other sister cities before, and perhaps we probably still have some that are sort of dead, okay? But over my years, and this is my 18th year in City Council, over my years, people have contacted me and asked me about sister city arrangement. And I suspect that if they contacted me, they must have contacted other councillors also, probably not the same people. If you look on the internet, you will see a long thing there about sister city, and there is one just about London, and it gives the history of London. And it's a very, very nice history, except for one little paragraph where it talks about serial killers. And we really need to get that off. It gives London a really bad name about serial killers. Some things that I didn't even know, but it's there. Having put that aside, sister city arrangement could be for different reasons, and we could decide what are those reasons. It could be economic, it could be social, it could be cultural, it could be a lot of things. Like I said, over the years, I've had interest shown from at least 6 different cities. I remember once, about 12 years ago, I got a letter from somebody in Poland, from the City Council in Poland. I think it was Poland. I don't even know what happened to that letter now, but I've got other verbal requests, even up to last year and a couple of years ago, some of the people from the Carriled, for example. And we have shown interest in helping the Federation of Canadian Municipalities work on different local economic development in these different communities on behalf of the federal government. In fact, 25% of the work that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities does is for international. And many of those cities would like to form a sister city arrangement with some of the cities in Canada. There's a sister city international, which started way back in 1956 with President Eisenhower, and that still exists today. There's as far as I know, there's a sister city arrangement in Canada, for Sister City of Canada. We seem to be the lowest with respect to having sister city. I think that it's time now, sorry, one other thing. The reason this came up at this point in time was because we got a letter that was addressed from the mayor of a city in Haiti to our mayor, and a copy was sent to me, because they know that I was on the board of Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and I had some contact with the Rotary Club of London. I'm not a member of the Rotary Club, but we talked about sister cities in the past. So I just think that it's time that we decide on this, whether we want to entertain sister city arrangement or not entertain it. And if whether we want it or not, I think that it's time that we have some kind of a policy. Because when people ask me, I don't know what to tell them. I can't just tell them, no, our city is not interested, or yeah, I'll touch bases with the city. We have protocol or procedures for raising the flags. We used to have for proclamation. We used to have for, we don't have anything as that I'm aware of. But here's the kicker. There are lots of different ethnic groups, people from different countries in our community. I think we speak 95 different languages just in London alone. That's a lot of people from different parts of the world. We entertain international students by the drove. In fact, we entertain at the business school. I believe that more than half the students are international students, and most of them are from China or India. We engage in sports. In fact, just right now, we're getting a lot of medals in South Korea for Canada, and some of them are from London. Some of those medals are people from London. What I'm trying to say is that we go all over the world, and all over the world come to us. So, to me, it would be nice to have some kind of an arrangement. And if we don't want to have any kind of arrangement, let's decide it now. And that's what this proposal or this request is all about. So I'll leave it there. A gentleman from Rotary Club has contact me about this, and I suggested to them that they should ask for delegation status, and that's why they asked for delegation status. And if you allow them, they'll come down and make a brief presentation to you. Thank you for allowing me.
Okay, I'll just look to committee about the delegation request. I understand it's Mr. Knox and Mr. Eberhardt who's here to speak, but I just wonder if we want to hear the delegation. Okay, I see people moving, so we'll just get that up on the screen. Mr. Knox, if you have a presentation, you can come down to use the computer. Okay. Okay, we'll open that vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, we'll just give Mr. Knox a bit of time to get down here.
Thank you, members of the council. Appreciate this short visit, short opportunity. My name is Steve Knox. Let's see, I'm the president of the Rotary Club of London. Rotary is a network of about 1.2 million people around the world. They're business owners, they're professionals, community-minded volunteers and leaders, and we are in 194 countries. Our motto, for those that don't know it, is service above self, and our model of constructive community interaction to bring goodwill, peace, and understanding among all people. How do we accomplish change? Well, we do it in a lot of different ways, but we have relationships between our clubs of the roughly, there's got to be over 3,000 clubs across the world. And what we do is we will interact with a club in Akin, Haiti, for example, or in Danlí, Honduras, or in Mexico or Africa. And we actually bring things to the table with the two organizations working together to achieve change. And one of the things that we do, so for example, how we achieve peace or work towards peace is we have peace scholarships. We give $30,000 to an individual to study conflict resolution and peace at a graduate level. And those people go out, we have over 1,000 of those graduates that are out working in areas of conflict to try to reduce conflict and make our world a better place. We have groups of just friendship exchanges. So a group from Croatia is coming in June, and we'll put them up in our homes and just interact with them. We have an international conference in June with over 40,000 delegates who will be coming from around the world to see our fair city in Toronto. The biggest thing is that Rotary is a group of volunteers. It's like herding cats because we're all business leaders and used to doing things our own way. And we try to get together and do it as a service project. Around town, we do local service projects, so we'll interact with the community and have something for language for newcomers to London, for example, as an initiative. We have the skating rink in Rotary Park. So we do a lot of things around the town and around the world. And we actually approached Councillor Usher on this idea that, you know, why do we have a sister city relationship with Akin, Haiti, where we had a group of Rotarians go down in January, and they started building walls, literally walls, and also building bridges between our community and the commune of Akin. I raised the Federation of Canadian Municipalities as there are obviously something that basically consider the relationships fostered by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, encouraging knowledge transfer and best practices. Obviously, Mayor Brown and other attendees had a dialogue with the cities around the world, around the country. And I think this cycle, that 3 to 5 year cycle, having a sister city policy coming up on this next policy cycle would be beneficial to get it done. Apparently, it's been sitting for about 10 years, the policy that's in place. Or it's not a policy, but it was a tabled policy, and it never got initiated. The Caribbean Local Economic Development Project is a 5-year project, was 6, but they spent all their money, and it's building relationships and local economic development projects in the Caribbean, and it's largely done by the Government of Canada and the Federation of Municipalities. What does this have to do with London and the sister city partnerships? The purpose is to establish and sustain human relations between residents of the two cities through visits, projects, events of mutual discovery, appreciation, enjoyment, learning, development, and response to crisis. It isn't just about business development. And I think some of the concept of sister cities is somehow it's supposed to, build economic development, help London in particular, or help this other city. But it's much greater than that. And it's being driven by friendships and partnerships and capacity building between non-government agencies. So if we think of who's actually going to implement it, it isn't necessarily just the government implementing these sister city relationships. It's going to be organizations like Rotary or Kiwanis or the other churches, schools, Western University. So think of the Sister City International members as independent organizations run by volunteers, representatives from local institutions, the libraries, the hospitals, and municipal governments. So it's a partnership of all these entities. The Partner Cities organization plan and implement cooperative activities and exchanges in cultural education, municipal technical business, and humanitarian fields. We're asking you to pass a resolution requesting the City Council to act on the proposal to develop a sister city policy. City Council can invite its administrators to review the 2008 proposed policy on sister cities and make a recommendation either to reactivate it, rework it, or junk it. But to Councillor Usher's point, let's look at it, and it's been sitting on the table. It's been tabled, for 10 years. Government relations would be able to assist in providing the interface to community groups, providing service clubs, hospitals, schools, museums interested in the London policy. Council, following staff recommendations, is encouraged to establish a revolving Sister City Committee, predominantly of non-elected representatives with oversight and communication links to City Council. The committee would assist in implementing Council's policy. The committee would also be accountable to the policy or to the Council. The Sister City Committee would work together to determine priority areas, create and implement activity recommendations on an annual basis. These would include the formal recognition process for entering into partner city relationships. In conclusion, the sister cities would have an overarching outcomes to benefit individuals, neighborhoods, service clubs, educational institutions, government businesses, professionals, religious, cultural, and health institutions, including combinations of reciprocal visitations for friendship, business development, and civil society capacity building and management. There was an article in London Free Press about our 7 members going down to Haiti, and this is John Eberhard, who couldn't make it today, so... Oh, he made it. John, welcome. So let Rotary light up your world, and hopefully you'll take this recommendation under consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knox. Having heard the delegation committee members and having heard from Councillor Usher, how would you like to proceed? The draft language that he had included in his letter is up. Part A is drafted in such a way that it requires direction from council. So obviously we can't pass Part A without taking a position. We need to say yes or no, whether we want to participate in sister city partnerships. So I just look to committee to see how you'd like to proceed. Councillor Morgan.
I'd like to start by asking a question of our staff, and then I have some comments. But first off, I just want to thank both Councillor Usher as well as the presenter and Mr. Eberhard for being here and speaking and sharing your thoughts with us today. I think it's very valuable. Do we, to our staff, what sort of framework or policies do we already have in place with related to, sister cities? I know we have one. I know the activities kind of come and go, but do we actually have anything already existing or any sort of framework that we're already using? I know that part of the recommendation here is to potentially enhance that and make it better, but I just want to get a sense on what are we currently operating under, if anything.
Mr. Hayward.
Through the chair, the only thing that I'm aware of is that there was a resolution that was provided by council requesting a report back on the development of a draft policy. That's the only thing that I'm aware of. Now it'd take me a little bit to go back and see if there's actually anything drafted and brought forward. I don't believe so. No, there's nothing. I'm seeing lots of no's around. So I think that's the sum total of where we went. In terms of past relationships, I think Councillor Usher had indicated there were a couple. I think one from the early 90s with Quebec City and one with Nanjing in the 2000s. I think one of the worst things that can happen with sister city arrangements is that nothing gets done with them. I think that's where I appreciate where Councillor Usher wants to go in terms of making a decision once and for all. And now in terms of bringing back a report, I know you didn't ask me this, but I'm going to give it anyway. Resource requirements that we have, obviously this is not something that was on our work plan this year, so it will take us a little bit, probably by the end of the third quarter maybe, we'll be able to get something back to you after we've looked into it a little bit more and looked at all the ramifications and absorbed some of the presentation that we've seen up there. So.
Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Hayward, for both answering my question as well as the bonus content. It's always appreciated because you usually say something insightful. So on this, and again, I appreciate what's been done. In the short amount of time that I had, and I just kind of pulled it up here again, I was trying to find out what other cities have done with this, and the term, sister cities has been used, but also in places like Toronto, they talk about a differentiation between their partnership cities and friendship cities, those related to an economic development connection and fostering and growing that, and those that are related to more of a cultural and citizen exchange of ideas and information, and many of the ideas that were perhaps mentioned in the presentation. And I know it was specifically mentioned in the presentation, it's not always about the economic partnership. I think other cities have done probably themselves some credit to separate those two and be very clear about the rationales and purposes of engaging in partnerships. On the economic side, I think there is some value in having
partnership relations, or at least very strategic thinking around those who we already have economic connections with, or those that we're growing economic connections with from multiple standpoints, whether that's from a business community, a political community, or the community at large. And so I think there's value in the approach that the City of Toronto has taken there. On Friendship Cities, in the way that that's developed is it can sometimes be initiated by a group like a service club who would come forward and say, we want to develop this partnership, and then get an endorsement of city council, and then there would be some city support in the work of those two. So to the question that Councillor Usher poses about and that's, whether or not we wish to participate in a Citrus Cities partnership, for me, it kind of depends. It depends on that information back and where the value is, because I do think that there is no point in having a relationship with the city that isn't leading anywhere, whether that's from a business or economic perspective, or a cultural exchange and a working together and learning more about each other perspective. So if that is our goal, then I would like to see the potential in that before making a decision on whether we go down that road in a meaningful way. And then, of course, you could have a policy to govern how that would work at the appropriate time. So to me, it's kind of a two-phase process, and that's figuring out what the possible options are for types of partnerships, and then actually developing the framework to govern those partnerships in a meaningful way. And if we don't see, kind of like how Councillor Usher has structured his request, we don't see value in the formation of them, then we don't really need a policy because we're not doing it. So I can't answer A without the type of information that Mr. Hayward is actually talking about in, what would this look like for London, and how would we divide it up based on maybe some of the best practices of other municipalities. So those are my thoughts on what's done. I think there is some value. I mean, my other job is at an institution that has international partnerships, and even in my other job, I've gone to other cities and academic institutions and seen great value in that sort of exchange. But it has to be something that works right for the city government to be endorsing in some way, I think, as well.
Other speakers? Councillor Zabin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just echo some of Councillor Morgan's points. Frankly, and thanks, Councillor Usher, for bringing this forward, because and this presentation was quite helpful, because I frankly don't really know the purpose of our sister city partnership. It's never really been elucidated to me why we have it, the purpose of it, what we really do with it. Are there benefits to the community in China, to community here in London? What is it exactly that the benefits that we get from that? And I think from Mr. Knox's presentation, that was quite helpful in elucidating a bit around what it is exactly, or what potentials there are in a relationship with a sister city. And frankly, I guess I would prefer to see that we have some exploration of exactly what the purpose is that we want out of our sister city partnerships, and having a report back on, I guess, some of those options would be quite beneficial before we do take a final position on whether or not we want to go ahead with this. Because if we're simply taking on a position and participating in sister city partnerships and then create the policy, I think it's a little bit backwards. So frankly, I think I'd rather have some information before on what we want to create and have the benefits of those partnerships being, and then we can take a position at that point.
Okay, I'm starting to get a bit of a consensus here. Mayor Brown, go ahead.
Thank you. I too want to thank Councillor Usher for bringing this forward. I think it's important for us to have this discussion. You mentioned our sister city, Nanjing. We just celebrated a 20th anniversary with that community. There are strong ties between Western University and Nanjing University, particularly in medicine. And there has been a good deal of back and forth between both our LEDC and our Chamber of Commerce and Nanjing. It'd be really, I think, valuable for us to hear about that when this report comes back. When I read Part A of the recommendation that's brought forward by Councillor Usher, I think what he's really saying is, let's make a decision. Do we want to pursue sister cities or don't we? And we're going to get there. I think that the report that Councillor Morgan is asking for is going to help us make that decision. And so both Councillor Usher's recommendation and Councillor Morgan's motion, I think will get us to the same place. And so I'm very pleased to support the motion that Councillor Morgan is bringing forward, recognizing it's in the spirit what you're asking for, Councillor Usher. And I'll say very quickly, at the next item on the agenda, I'll speak to this in a little bit further detail, but there is very good interest in communities south of our border that have trade relationships with us in partnering in this way as well. And perhaps we can work on that as this report's being generated as well for the third quarter.
Okay, the motion has just been revised briefly. Just make sure everybody sees that. Councillor Usher.
I don't want to take up anybody's time for the committee, but I just wanted to add a few very good things. I really do appreciate my colleagues. I appreciate where they're coming from. I think, though, that this is what we make of it, ultimately. We could make it this, or we could make it this. But we have to play the part. But the other cities also. You know, I was giving a speech yesterday, not yesterday, on Sunday, and one of the things I talk about is the desire to achieve something, the belief that you could achieve it, and the determination to achieve it. And ultimately, we could achieve it. And I look at this as the same. I want to remind you, though, that we as a city, have played a major part in Caroled, both here and sending people abroad. We've sent a lot of people to different of those islands and Belize and Guyana during a Caroled program. It's almost the same type of thing. And we've brought many of those people here. I remember one of the FCM conference that we had. And by the way, it's not just the Caribbean, but we also play a major role in the Ukraine. In fact, one of the established people for FCM in the Ukraine is from London. And we play those parts. And also we talk about the students. We have a large number of international students, and we try to encourage that. And all of these things help us. So I'm saying you could make it small, or you could make it large. And finally, Mr. Chair, I just want to remind you that right at the outset, I said to you that one of the reasons this came at this point in time is because we have a letter from a city called Akwin in Haiti, addressed to the mayor. It's a possible sister-city relations between London, Ontario, and Akwin, Haiti. And I'm not going to read the whole letter, but it talked about, accordingly, I'm pleased to extend an invitation to have our respective administrations enter into a discussion that could lead to formal relationship under the Sister Cities International Protocol. And they do talk about enhanced relationship, facilitate mutual benefits of friendship, business, and capacity building. And we must not just think that it's little have-not cities that want to be. There are nice, good relationship, cultural relationship, and educational things that we could learn from the little cities as well as the large cities. So I hope we're not saying, oh, those cities can't give us anything. They could, no matter how small they are. Thank you.
Any other discussion, colleagues? Well, certainly when it comes to Nanjing, which is a very large city, I think we could probably learn something about their transit system. They started building their rapid transit in 2000. They had no metro rapid transit system to speak of at that time. Now they have 347 kilometers of metro system, which they have built out in 9 different lines. It carries millions of people a day, almost 1 billion people a year on their transit system, which they started building in 2000 when they became a sister city with us, I guess. So, you know, I think we could probably learn from them in terms of how to build out rapid transit.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, colleagues, I'd like to go to items number 12, 13, and 14.
Mr. Chair, can I just, through you, and just thank the two gentlemen from the Rotary Club for being here and making that presentation, both Mr. Eberhardt, who has been corresponding with me, and Mr. Knox for his presentation.
Thanks. Okay, I'd like to go to items number 12, 13, and 14. Deal with those appointments and the rank ballots for those, and then go back and deal with items 8 through 11 while we're doing the tallying for that. So perhaps we can have nominations. Well, we'll deal with just the one appointment for 12. That doesn't require a rank ballot. For 13 and 14, I'd like to take nominations for those, unless we're going to just deal with everybody, in which case we can dispense with the nomination step.
Number 12 just has the one individual, so we can do that one straight.
Yeah. Okay, so for 13, do you want to do nominations or just rank all of them? That's for the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, right? Okay, and for 14, do you want to do nominations or just rank everyone? Okay. 12's up, moved and seconded. Let's vote on that.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, 13, no nominations, so let's just, oh, there will be nominations. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I put forward Albert Cheng for nomination?
Any other nominations? Councilor Morgan.
Yes, I'll add Morris and Van Linden.
Mayor Brown?
I'll add Anna Marie Rose Evans.
Any other nominations? No. Okay. Just have the ballot circulated for that. Okay, let's just set 13 aside for a moment and we'll look for nominations for 14. Looking for one voting member at large. We have a number of very qualified applicants. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to nominate, sorry, I don't have the first name right now, Sirwa, I believe, S-I-R-O-S.
Rose Servois.
Thank you.
Other nominations? You can nominate more than one, just go ahead. Councilor Morgan.
I'll add Eric Shepherd.
Any others? Okay, I'm going to nominate Jean-Marc Metralier and John Simpson and Chris Pollitt. Sorry, also Winkle Molden. Sorry. I thought someone had already nominated. Apologies to the clerk for that last minute nomination.
Mr. Chair, we do have the results for number 13, if you're ready for that.
Sure am.
Since the vote required 3 appointments, the 3 that made through round 1 with the highest is Albert Chang, Anne-Marie Rose Evans, and Maggie Morris.
Okay, let's have a motion to appoint those folks to the committee. Great to have so many qualified people applying for the advisory committees. Can we move in a seconder for that? Any discussion? Okay, open the vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
And those results will be included in the package that go to the council. So what was up on the screen will be there for people to review. I don't suppose 14's ready. It's fine. Let's go back to item number 8. It's the mayor's report on the FCM trip to Washington, D.C. I'll look to perhaps the mayor, if you would like to say anything about that.
Thanks very much, Chair. In January, I had an excellent opportunity to travel to Washington, D.C. with a number of colleagues from the Big City Mayor's Caucus through FCM. It was an opportunity that was organized by both the Canadian Embassy in D.C. It was co-hosted by the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And the U.S. Conference of Mayors had reached out to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and invited us to attend. It was a very productive time. I can say it was also very timely. As you know, the latest round of talks over the NAFTA negotiations were occurring simultaneously in Montreal. And what our main focus, I would say, of the trip was to just articulate very clearly, mayor to mayor, on both sides of the border, how important fair trade is and how important free trade is to all of our communities. London has approximately $13 billion in trade with our number 1 trading partner, with the United States. And it was important, I think, for us to articulate that to our colleagues south of the border. We had a chance to meet with the vice chair of the vice president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, participate in some sessions at the Wilson Center, Canada Institute. We had an opportunity to meet for about an hour with the Canadian ambassador. His team was also in the room. They're directly involved in connecting with those negotiating the NAFTA trade. And so those were very productive discussions, and most of them were hopping on an airplane the next morning to head to Montreal. And I would say also an opportunity for me to connect with a number of mayors from key communities in the United States. So, for example, Maplewood, of course, 3M is located in Maplewood. It's a population of 40,000 people in that community, 10,000 employees with 3M, and so it's a city within a city. A chance to speak after the conference with the mayor of Sterling Heights, and we all know that General Dynamics Land Systems is a key part of our local economy. The number of similarities between between Sterling Heights and London really surprised me, and the mayor has indicated he'd like to take a trip up to London and to get to know our community a little bit better. I would say that if I could summarize sort of the theme of the discussion, certainly NAFTA was a key area of discussion. Everybody, I think, agrees that there's room for an update. This is a document that's 25 years old, that was developed before the internet was really mainstream, and there's a lot of room there to grow. But also, people on both sides of the border could see the strength of that trading relationship and the counterintuitive consequence of thickening the border. And we know that Mike Moffat has written about this as well, that vehicles pass between 6 and 8 times just for vehicle manufacturing. And by thickening the border, it increases cost, and it really makes it easier for other international vehicles to be sold in both of our countries. I'd say also that mayors from both sides of the border picked up on a theme that we were maybe taking that relationship for granted. We're so close in so many ways that we don't spend the kind of time that we need to on developing those relationships. And so most of the discussions we agreed were really first steps and commitments to continue to strengthen those. Each of the mayors that I spoke with, without prompting for me, who have close trading relations with London, had indicated an interest in exploring sister city conversations. And so Councillor Usher's letter was very timely with this report. And so I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. It's a fairly detailed report. I would say this to close. The Big City Mayors Caucus has really, I think, recognized some solid wins locally, within the borders of Canada, when it comes to things like the refugee crisis in Syria, when it comes to focusing on key priorities for our largest cities, when political parties are developing their platforms at the national level, and then also continuing to lobby for things like affordable housing funding, for things like transit funding. We can work rapid transit into probably any debate in other areas. This is the first time that we've gone beyond our borders, that we haven't looked at domestic policy, we've looked at international policy, and I think it was very valuable, and this is probably the first of many such initiatives you'll see in the years to come.
Okay, I'll look for speakers. Councilor Morgan.
Yes, thank you. First off, I want to thank the mayor for his report and his comments on the conference. It sounded like the meetings were fruitful, and I appreciate the targeting of the meetings with mayors of cities where there are economic connections. And I thought one of the things that wasn't mentioned in the report that was of great value was actually the appendix, where the Brookings report, which profiles London, and this is an American-based report, so I believe these numbers are in US dollars. But not just London's connections with other cities, but you can actually go and get the information about other cities and their trading partnerships and where London kind of ranks with them. I haven't had a chance to go through the document yet, but I certainly will, and I have had a chance to chat with a colleague about it briefly. But there is great value in knowing our economic connections with other cities, particularly those that cross the border for times when trade resolutions and agreements are up for renewal, and these connections are really important. For example, number 4 on this list is Kansas City. I was recently in Kansas City for my own, I was going to a football game, that's why I was there. But it would have been good to know some of the connections between Kansas City should I had the opportunity to engage with some of the members of council there while in the cities. It would have been a nice connection to talk to and foster those relationships. So knowing the information is a very powerful position to be in, and I think what we need to do as a municipality is more to find out, to learn more about exactly how our city-to-city trading relationships are, where the major employers are, what the major connections are, and so this is a good step in the process, but it's certainly something that I think council and the City of London can do a lot more of in the future. So, but thank you for the report. It was very good.
Any other discussion? Okay. We have a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Okay, let's open the vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
Let's check in to see how we're doing on 14. Okay, go ahead.
It was a very interesting election, Mr. Chair. We actually had to flip a coin at one point. So the winner based on the rank vote is Rose Siroris.
Okay. This obviously had multiple rounds. Would anyone like to see the rounds? Yes. Okay, Councillor Morgan would like to see the rounds.
This is round one. Oh, sorry, it's not. This is round one.
So this is where you flipped the coin?
So, no.
You flipped the coin in the second
This
round?
one we took because Mr. Simpson had.
Okay, just go through the rounds. You don't have to.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
Anyway. This is round two. Round three. This is where we had to flip the coin because they had the exact same numbers. This is round four. Round five. And then round six.
Okay, and all of those will be included in the report that goes to council as well, if anyone wants to look at it in great detail. Okay, that's been moved and seconded. I want to thank everyone who applied. That was a very large number of very qualified people for the Cycling Advisory Committee, and I hope that they will all continue to be engaged in advocacy on cycling, whether they're on the advisory committee or not.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, that brings us to 3 requests for designation of municipal significance for 3 different festivals. I wonder if we could deal with them all together. Councillor Zafman, looks like you want to move that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move numbers 9, 10, and 11 together.
Is there a seconder for that? Thank you. Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Opening the vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
Brings us to the deferred matters list. Let's get a mover for that. Any discussion on the deferred matters list? Seeing none, let's open the vote.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay, I have a motion to go into closed session. We have 2 items on the agenda, C1 and C2. The reasons are listed. Councillor Zafman, thank you. So we're headed into committee room 3. I expect that we will go back into public session in committee room 3, open the door to look for the media, and then adjourn from committee room 3. We won't be coming back in here. Okay, that's up.
Motion carries 4-0. We will be going in camera for the 2 items, C1 and C2, as stated on the public agenda.